I just rode the new Canyon Spectral AL 200 miles, and I want to talk about it. At a modest price of $2,899, I initially thought this bike was going to be for the newer rippers of your family or a beginner mountain biker who didn't want to sell a kidney to get into the sport. Turns out, this bike stood up to pretty much every test I threw at it. From laps at my local trails, big mountain days, and even cross-country epics, this bike exceeded a lot of my expectations. I want to go through a comprehensive review of this bike. We're gonna start by building the bike and how easy it was to build being a direct-to-consumer brand, my first impressions, how this bike handled a wide variety of different terrains, some notes on sizing, because spoiler alert, the sizing was actually pretty weird, and finally, some pros and cons of this mindfully crafted version of the updated Spectral AL. Let's get into it. I chose to build my bike without the help of a Canyon technician, and I can say it was very easy and only took about 25 minutes. Canyon provided high-end build support out of the box, sending me a shock pump and torque wrench to make sure I had every tool to build this bike. They even sent a dry bag so I would be ready for my first big ride on my new rig. The bike had smart setup details, such as a little holder to make sure my dropper post cable didn't get lost in the frame, directions on my suspension to set the sag, and they even used Shimano's iSpec system on the brakes for a clean and minimalist cockpit setup. All right, it's time to hit the trails. Even though I did manage to ride this bike over 200 miles over the course of this review, I had a lot of really positive first impressions. So let's go over those. Initially, I did expect this bike to feel a little cheap or more of a beginner build. For reference, for the last several years, I'm one of those snooty mountain bikers who has been dying on the hill of XO1 group sets and factory suspension. So you can understand that I was a little weary on getting on such a cheap build. Right off the bat, I was impressed with where Canyon chose to spend their money on this build. Looking immediately to the SLX drivetrain and SLX brakes, this is one of the first budget bikes I have come across that didn't just slap on OEM brake sets that immediately needed to be swapped if you planned on going slightly downhill. Another detail I appreciated was a 200mm dropper post as a standard offering on the medium frame. I'm a 6-foot-tall rider with a 33-inch inseam. It is basically a guarantee that I'm going to have to replace whatever dropper post comes on a bike for a bigger one to support my inseam. During the build of my bike, I did immediately put some tire inserts in and converted to tubeless. But even though Canyon put inner tubes in the bike, the rims were already set up with tubeless tape, which I did appreciate. Overall, beyond the tire inserts, I didn't have to spend a penny to get this bike ready to ride up to my standards. I will say, the thing I hated the most about this bike was the fact that I couldn't fit a 16-ounce water bottle into the frame. It seems like a small detail, but I plan my nutrition based on larger bottles. Seems kind of funny for a certified adventure bike, right? Anyways, enough of this gabbing. Let's go hit the trails. With a 4-bar horse link suspension setup, Canyon kept this simple and allowed this to be a climbing monster. The steep seat angle, positioned at 76.5 degrees, made big mountain days a breeze. I did opt for the medium frame, which offered a shorter reach on this bike without feeling small, and I found myself very comfortable on 2-hour-plus climbs. One thing I will say, when I was doing harder pushes on sustained climbs, the pedal bob coming out of the shock was noticeable. That was easily fixed by just locking out the shock. And I do want to note that I really only felt the pedal bob when I was climbing a paved road. It's not nearly as noticeable on any trail climbs. As for technical climbing, there were some struggles, but maybe not from where you would expect. The low hub engagement coming from the back wheel on this build caused some issues on technical climbs, especially when pedal ratcheting was needed. I got a lot of knock from the cranks, trying to ratchet up rocks, and found myself underspinning the cranks, expecting the hubs to engage. This would be easily fixed with a nice hub, or just replacing the whole rear wheel with a more average wheel altogether. However, the geometry of this bike did make it a pleasure to work up and over rocks, roots, and loose fire roads. The longer chainstay and approachable reach on this bike made forward to backward weight management so simple, and the 4-bar suspension design made this bike feel glued to the rocks and unfazed when I encountered any loose rocks just begging to knock me off balance. Further, for an aluminum bike with a budget build, this bike is actually quite light. I found myself looking forward to every rock and root I encountered on my climb, and almost forgot that I was climbing solely to get to my next descent. Okay, enough of all the climbing. This is where things go downhill fast. Because we're gonna talk about descending next, because like downhill, descending, right? Okay, anyways. This bike rose to the occasion on the downhills, and frankly, this bike really showed up and balled out on big downcountry days. While I rode this bike at the bike park, on my local hill, and through chunky moto trails, this bike was my absolute favorite on big backcountry descents. Most notably, I took this bike to Durango for a weekend, was able to ride over 65 miles and descended almost 10,000 feet over the course of a few days. And this bike was able to handle anything we threw at it, including black chunky descents and black technical climbs. Canyon made an informed decision by decking the wheels out with double Maxxis DHR tires, both on the front and back. I questioned that decision initially, but immediately understood the move when I took this bike down backcountry trails. The tire choice allowed for very little rolling resistance to get the most speed out of undulating terrain, but got sporty real fast as you started to lay it down into flat, old school corners. The Spectral also did take some notes from their bigger enduro brothers by making the wheelbase relatively massive compared to similar bikes. Coming in at 1,280 millimeters on the large frame, this bike is as long as an Atherton 170, a Propane Tyee, or a Rocky Mountain Instinct. All big, beefy enduro bikes built for rock-smashing speed. This long wheelbase made holding lines through fast chunk pretty simple, but you got a nice twist by managing a generally lighter bike than its super enduro sisters, which allowed me to pop around and pick fun lines. The generally longer trail bike was pretty quick to get used to. While I did need to take a few rides to get comfortable with where my back tire was, I didn't find any issues with agility on this bike due to that traditionally longer wheelbase. Let's look a little bit more into the components of this particular build. I can now see why Canyon opted for the nicer SLX group set. They really set this thing up to shine when you want to get aggressive. One of my biggest complaints with budget builds is that companies just slap on an OEM brake set that inevitably needs to be swapped if you plan on getting hot and heavy with the brakes. I think that decision alone makes this bike so worth the money, knowing that you won't have to mess with these brakes or drivetrain until you need to swap pads or grab a fresh chain. My one complaint component-wise is the Fox float suspension. The suspension is fine, but lacks adjustability. Basically, what you feel is what you get beyond some rebound adjustment. I did experience issues with my shock around 150 and 200 miles in, but after tearing off the air can, inspecting internals, and re-greasing a few spots, the shock is still working. I do anticipate needing to get a more durable shock for the life of this bike and for what I intend to use it for. A bike this size does make you start to question why you need an enduro bike or an XC bike as well. With the Spectral's travel coming in at 150 millimeters in the front and 140 millimeters in the back, I found myself reaching for this bike more than my enduro bike over the course of my big mountain riding. I know over the last few years, the industry trend has been pushing us to think that we all need a 170 millimeter super enduro for our local trails, but bigger really is not always better and leaves you wheezing when you want to pedal a local lap. Remember, this is a budget trail bike. If you're looking to get on practically any trail and have a good time for under $3,000 and without owning 4 bikes, this could support you on anything from a big cross-country day all the way to a shuttle night at your local hill before you feel underbiked. Now on to the bike fit. This was pretty interesting for me because remember, I'm 6 foot tall with a 33-inch inseam. I would actually be considered pretty tall by most men's standards even. So I was pretty caught off guard when I realized that the geometry of this bike was pushing me more towards a medium size frame. Because I've never ridden anything less than a large frame, I definitely did have to do a double take at the dimensions to confirm that the medium was going to be a better fit for me. First off, the reach of this bike was exceptionally long. For a large frame, the reach was around 500 millimeters, which beat the reach numbers by any other bike in my comparisons. Even the large Transition Sentinel came in at 480, and Transition is known for being an incredibly long bike. The medium's reach came in at 475 millimeters, which was in line with most of their large framed bikes in my lineup. Further, looking at the wheelbase of the Spectral AL, it was the longest amongst all competitors. This makes for a nice stable bike, but some may find this incredibly long wheelbase a bit more challenging to maneuver through tight trails. In my chart, you'll see that the medium Spectral frame was in line with the wheelbase of many of its large frame competitors. Lastly, the dropper post height was a very welcome surprise to me. The medium frame is boasting a 200 millimeter dropper post. Very impressive. And for my long legs, I was so happy I didn't have to swap a post. With that being said, I almost had the post fully inserted into the medium frame for my fit to feel good. My tips on this bike if you plan to buy it, check the sizing dimensions before you just order your standard size, as you may need to size down on this one. I'm curious, and leave in the comments if you prefer longer bikes, and also let me know if this is a bold move for bike companies to have such varied sizing across brands. I want to talk about the easy stuff first. Let's talk about what I loved about this bike. The build overall. Canyon knocked it out of the park with component selection on this bike. Truly, there wasn't much that needed to be swapped out from its out-of-the-box build. The SLX group set was the star of the show. I had confidence that I wouldn't need to switch out my SLX brakes if I knew I wanted to take this on a big downcountry or more enduro-oriented day. I also really love the 200 millimeter dropper post that came on the medium frame. As a tall gal with long legs, it was nice to not have to spend a few $100 to swap to a dropper that fit me better. I love that this bike really shined as a downcountry monster. I know downcountry is a little bit of a gray term, but I'm talking about big days in the mountains where you don't know what you're gonna face. Looking back on the 200 miles of adventure this bike propelled me through, I most fondly recall our big days in Durango on old school blue and black trails, and big enduro days on my local mountain on rough, rooty single track. I think this bike really could be a one bike to rule them all type of machine. I found myself using my enduro bike much less over the summer, as a long wheelbase on this did provide higher confidence at high speed. I think you could be really happy on this bike for big cross-country days as well, especially because the double Maxxis DHR tire choice let this rig roll very easily. Okay, enough with the compliments, as nothing is perfect. There were a few things I did not like about this bike. First off, the cheap rear wheel was my biggest issue on the bike. I know I just complimented the build a few moments ago, but I do truly think the low engagement back wheel did limit this bike, as it was constantly in my head that I wanted to swap it for a more mid-range wheel that didn't have so much crank play. This did make technical climbing a bit of a chore, and I fear that such a cheap wheel may not last through the aggressive days we will inevitably have on this bike. The other thing I didn't love was the Fox Float Performance suspension. I do realize that this is a budget build, and going up to Performance Elite would have shot the price tag up. But I did have some issues with that rear shock seizing up 2 times during my test period. I was able to get the shock working again after some teardowns and re-grease, but it was a point of failure on the bike. The performance suspension also allows for small amounts of adjustability. So if you're a dial snob, this suspension may be a limiting factor for you. Finally, and make fun of me for this, I did not like that you couldn't fit a larger water bottle into where the bottle cage belonged. I know YT has also had this issue with their frame design in the past, but it was annoying to basically always have to go with a water pack if I planned on doing any slightly larger rides. I know, it's really picky. Overall, this bike was an absolute joy to ride. I did an absolute job of riding this bike like a top-tier goober, and it stood up to all of my poor line choice. For a budget build, I think Canyon really did knock this one out of the park. Not only would this bike be fantastic for any new shredder in your home, but it's a bike that will rise to the occasion when you want to push it hard, even if you are on a budget. You can get this bike shipped directly to your home like how I did, or get it shipped to a Canyon-affiliated shop like REI and have one of their mechanics set it up for you. Check out the different builds on Canyon.com. You can get the current model that I tested on Canyon's website for $2,899, and that's including free shipping. Let me know what you all think of this bike. Can this actually be that one bike to rule them all, or the proverbial quiver killer? Do you agree with me on what I liked and disliked about this bike? Also, would you buy a bike direct to consumer without seeing it in a showroom first? Thanks for watching, and I look forward to chatting with you guys about this bike in the comments. In the meantime, I'm gonna try to squeeze another 200 more miles out of this bike before the snow settles in. Catch you guys next time.
And for all of my 3 fans, a Huck to flat just for you. Oh.